important for us to understand what we do with that portfolio in retirement. So tonight's topic is going to cover quite a few different interesting things, and we'll see if we do have time for questions. If there's lots of questions coming in, we may just have to leave that for later on, and a property mentor will contact you to get some more information from you. So let me just introduce you to tonight's guest and and the people that are going to present. So first of all, we've got David Linko from Dublin Finance. David is a financial planner and a mortgage broker, and has had a very long history with the Property Club. David is also a property investor, and he understands how property works. We've also got Glenn Healy on board. Glenn is a very, very experienced property mentor. He's also a very experienced ex-branch manager, and is currently helping myself out with being the team leader in New South Wales and ACT. And we've got Jill Clifford also. Again, Jill is a very, very experienced branch manager. She's currently a property mentor with the SA branch. And the reason why we've got Glenn and Jill on tonight is to just give their experience also around retirement, because they both have very, very large portfolios. So without further ado, let me hand it over to David Linko, and let's start the presentation. Thanks, David.
Thanks very much, Joe. Thanks very much, Joe. I'll just go to the next screen. There we go. So there's a picture of Glenn and Jill, my co-presenters, picture of myself. I'm the principal of Dublin Wealth Management. My background is as an accountant, mortgage broker and financial planner. And given I'm a licensed planner, I need to let you know that the information this evening is general advice only. We'll give you some great ideas, certainly some homework at the end in order to help you progress your retirement planning and what questions you need to ask. But before you make any decisions, it's good and very important to get your own circumstances assessed by your own professional. So I'm looking forward to working with Glenn and Jill this evening. I've known Glenn since 2000. I've worked with Glenn since 2006, and I've been working with Jill. Well, known of Jill and had good discussions with her in a similar time frame, and been working with Jill professionally since last year as well. So let's have a look at what we're looking to do this evening. So when it comes to retirement planning for property investors, there's three key questions we need to understand. The first one is, how much do I need for retirement? Do I have sufficient? And often there's a sub-question I often get asked by investors, David, should I buy another property for retirement? And when it's too late, preceding retirement to buy one? So the first question, how much do I need for retirement? I'll touch on that in the next slide. The second one is, when can I start retirement? That's a very specific question, and it needs to have a specific answer, and it will depend on a number of considerations, which I'll go through as well. The third one is also as important, how long will it last? It's no good starting retirement and not having enough at the end. That's one of the fears that many of my clients have. So we need to make sure that there's enough at the end as well. So let's answer the first question, how much do I need in retirement? Now, we have got about 30 minutes this evening, so I've put yellow, some considerations in yellow. I'll see if I can touch on them at the end in discussing these additional considerations with Glenn and Jill. But the first one I want to talk about is, when you ask that question, how much do I need, it pertains to something called the retirement nest egg. Now, there's various assets you'll have in making up your retirement nest egg, and I've listed some of those in this slide here. Investment property portfolio, certainly that's part of your retirement nest egg, because that's the purpose of that is for retirement. Superannuation, shares, a camper is not necessarily part of your retirement nest egg. Holiday home, well, it depends. If your holiday home is something that will be used to fund retirement. I'll ask Jill that question at the end of the discussion this evening as well, because Jill and her husband Bevan have a holiday home, and was that part of their retirement nest egg? The other asset is the family home. Is that part of your retirement nest egg? And the answer is no. So when it comes to determining how much do I need, the first answer to that is, well, let's find out what is my retirement nest egg, because that is the sum available to fund retirement from now and for the next 30 to 40 years. I'll just touch on investment property portfolio considerations. In working out the value of your property portfolio for retirement and whether it's suitable for retirement, we need to look at holding costs. Because in retirement, holding costs can actually take away from your retirement income. It's very important to make sure that the portfolio is neutral, if not positively geared. And there's a whole range of questions in relation to that with regard to when the interest-only periods revert to principal and interest and when the holding costs will go up as well. Superannuation, I'll touch on that question with Glenn and Jill. But retirement nest egg, the concept of retirement nest egg is very important to understand and to determine how much you have. So if I took away your home from your financial position and your holiday home, if that's part of your family home as well, and any non-financial assets like the camper, etc., the value of all of those remaining assets, less all of the debt, is what we call your retirement nest egg. I'm just having a bit of difficulty moving the slide. There we go. The second part of this question, how much do I need, is answered by understanding the life stages in retirement. Now, I've been doing retirement planning for about, since 2007. And when I first looked at this area, retirement planning is often a linear model where you budget for a certain amount and you increase that with inflation for the next 30, 40 years. But it's not a very accurate model of expenditure in retirement, because as you age, the ability to spend money decreases as well. So we came up with something called the Dublin Retirement Planning Model. Now the basis for that is we have three life stages: active, passive and frail. And so when you start retirement, you have your health and that enables you to spend more money. That's why it's called active. You're able to spend more because you're able to complete the bucket list activities. It could be for 10 years, it could be for 15 years, it could be for 20 years. We're not sure, and it's different for everyone. But active is the first stage of retirement. And you need to allow for more funding for that life stage. The second life stage is passive, and that's when health problems occur and you're not able to live an active lifestyle, and you subsequently live a more sedentary lifestyle. As a result, you spend less. And how long would that be for? It could be for 10 years, it could be 15 years, it could be for 20. It's unsure. And then the last life stage is frail, where you need care. And that's where you can't spend. And who knows how long that is for. So in questioning how much do I need, we firstly need to look at our life stages, active, passive and frail, and determine what our living costs are. And I think our current living costs plus a margin, 10 to 15%, is a good position to start discussion for active. And then it's a case of determining longevity to come up with a number of how much do I need. So the retirement life stages and the Dublin retirement planning model will, along with the retirement nest egg, will actually give you some good inroads into determining how much I need. The living inheritance comment down below is a really good point in the retirement planning, and it talks about bringing forward an inheritance for your beneficiaries rather than it being passed upon to your beneficiaries at your eventual passing, to do it when you're still alive, and that way you can participate in the joy of giving a fund, a lump sum, as well as more than likely when your children need it the most as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. The second question is, when can I start retirement? So let's say you figured out the active, passive and frail. You've come up with the retirement nest egg. The second question is, when can I start? Well, it comes down to one concept, and that's liquidity. Liquidity is the ability to convert funds to cash quickly, within a couple of days, at most a week. If we look at the typical assets in our retirement nest egg, which one do you think is not a liquid asset? Shares or managed funds, certainly that's liquid. Term deposit would be liquid. Property portfolio is illiquid. Superannuation is liquid. Business is illiquid. It's still an asset to your self-employed person. If that business has a value, that's an asset, but it's illiquid, and that would take a lot longer than a property, for example, to dispose of. And then the Ford Mustang, well, it depends what year it is. Yeah, jokes aside, that is illiquid as well. So if you know how much you need, then the next question is, how much liquidity do you have? Even if you had enough liquidity, you're not going to start your retirement unless you know that there's enough money at the end as well. So in approaching this question, we need to look at the shortfall associated with your property portfolio, the overall liquidity, and the order that you have to boost your liquidity as well through cashing in assets, whether it's a term deposit of shares or even the property portfolio or the business as well. So liquidity is the key to determining when you can actually start retirement. The third question, how long will it last, is probably the most important, because if you get it wrong, it's not a pretty picture. Who wants to be told that they actually have to return to work in their 70s and 80s? Certainly not me. I certainly never want to sit in front of a client and say, hey, Fred and Wilma, you guys have to return to work because we didn't actually budget for this, or you spent too much. So in answering this last question, this is probably the most complex. That's where we do a process of retirement modelling. We will project out for the next 30 years, and this is what Glenn has done as well as Jill, and they've really scrutinised it to see if it's solid. And so let's look at the considerations in answering this question, how long will it last? Well, there's a lot of them. Retirement planning is not simple, it is complex, but in order to answer this question, you need to actually understand the complexity and come up with answers, because only then will you spend the money. Bear in mind, remember the first question I said is how much do I need? And I talked about the active, passive and frail. And active is where you spend more. You're certainly not going to be spending freely if you're uncertain of how long will it last. So this one needs to be absolutely rock solid. Some of the considerations, living expenses during active. What about the cost of inflation? If an aged care bond costs $700,000 in today's dollars, what will it be in 30 years' time? Do you have enough for that? What about your living expenses during passive? When will Centrelink kick in, and what's the impact of that on your cash flow? What about the property growth rates? That's a good one. When we do our retirement modelling, I only allow 4% capital growth for the portfolio. You may think, David, that's a bit low. I would agree with you, but I take a very conservative position. When should I sell property, if at all? Well, if you need to boost your liquidity and the property portfolio is your remaining asset, it's a case of when and which one should you sell. What about the super returns? What about the asset allocation within the super returns? Is it appropriate? Capital expenditure, do you need to buy a caravan? Do you need to renovate the bathroom, etc.? What about living expenses during frail? And that other one we talked about, living inheritance. Would you like to consider providing an advance inheritance to the children? I had a client only a few weeks ago who gave $100,000 to each of her two boys. She's a single lady in her 70s, and she'd come to the end of active and was in passive and decided she had sufficient. We crunched the numbers and made sure there was sufficient in the end. And at Christmas time, she gave them a Christmas card with a very big surprise in it. The most important thing is to understand this needs to be reviewed every year because changes will occur. And the only reason you'll keep spending money in active, passive and frail freely is if you know if all the what-ifs are covered. So let's talk about some of the signs of incomplete retirement planning. You may have seen a planner. Some of the signs are ongoing uncertainty about ceasing work. I'll look at it next year is often a common response that I get. And I dig deeper as to say, well, why would you look at that next year? Let's actually review your retirement plan to see what's not giving you the confidence. The other big challenge I find with a lot of clients is not living a full retirement in active. I think the goal for every retiree is to have a full retirement, and that's active when you can spend the money and when you do have your health to spend freely. but you won't do that unless you know there's enough at the end. So very briefly, this topic, typically I take a couple of hours on and over 2 or 3 meetings with clients. I've done it very quickly, but I've given you a nutshell of what questions to ask and the issues you need to address in starting retirement planning. Let's now have some questions and introduce Glenn and Sally, who retired in 2019, and Jill and Bevan Clifford, who retired in 2006. Let me ask them some questions, and I've got some questions for members. Let's talk about the active, passive and frail life stages. I may start off by asking Glenn this question and ask him, is this something you considered when you started your retirement in 2019 and did it make sense initially?
Well, yes, it did, David. We had a portfolio of properties and we were thinking we might hold those forever and live from the equity in those properties. But when we sat down with you and started to work through this retirement plan, we quickly realised that the money we need in the years straight after we retire was quite different, as you pointed out, to what we might need down the track when we're in a passive or frail situation. So, you know, we've set ourselves up through the retirement plan and modelling that we do with you, where we have, you know, somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000 tax-free in our active years. But as we move through passive, we're hitting around the 60,000 mark, and then obviously in frail, where we don't need it, we've come back to 50,000 in those frail years per annum. So our task now is to try and make sure that we actually use that money in active.
Yeah, funnily enough, that's a big challenge. So let me now hand it over to Jill and ask her. She's been retired since 2006. I've only started working with Jill and Bevan professionally last year. Can you talk to me about your living expenses and if that's changed much in terms of the new retirement model that we've talked about and which you're putting in place at the moment versus your living expenses prior to that?
Thanks, David. Well, I think we're a typical example of someone who's done it the other way around. In other words, we've just gone out there for the last probably 10 years, I guess, and just spent and done whatever we want, and then realised that perhaps we need to reassess what our portfolio is. We have a large portfolio like Glenn, and we manage to retain our lifestyle by selling our properties down, and sometimes not always at the best time. And as you know, David, we met you many years ago, and my one regret is that we didn't take up your advice earlier, because we were still, even though we were retired, we were still in almost accumulation mode without purchasing property. We bought our last property in 2012, and as I said, we've lived very well, but it's only because we started selling down our portfolio. And we were cautious in what we've been doing. We spoke to David only last year and were quite surprised to realise that we could have more money in retirement in our active years. Both Bevan and I are very healthy, and we think we've probably got considerable active years left. Like Glenn, we're looking at a different price range. We're looking at probably active in our active years, probably about 80,000. Then we're looking at 10 years, active years. Remember, we're in our mid-70s already, but we have extremely good health. And that's what appealed to us about your concept, David, is it was built around health. And that's why it'll be different for every member. And when we looked, we just assumed we'd have to go on selling our property straight away. And when we spoke to David, we were quite surprised that that wasn't actually necessary when we looked at our total liquidity.
Now Jill, let me just put my mindset into what members might be thinking, that both you and Glenn might be a little bit cuckoo. With respect, 80,000 a year for 10 years, that's 800. 60K for another 10 years in passive, that's 600. And Glenn's even worse. Surely there's some real issues here in terms of affordability and answering the question, how long will it last? Because that just seems like an awful amount of money.
It does, but it's the way the, I guess your concept works, looking at what you want to do in each lifestyle. And then I guess to be honest, we had looked at that we have to retain all our funds. So what were we going to live on? And it's been a mindset change to start living from our super, retaining some properties that we've got left and letting them grow. And remember, we've come through a period of very slow growth in property. So that was a bit of a surprise for us. We thought we'd have to go on selling them straight away. The other thing is looking at some other liquid assets we had, or assets I should say, that we could liquidate. That until we talked to you, that was how we were going to fund our retirement. We're going to eat into our super, which is a shock for a lot of people because you get nervous when your super starts to come down. Then to sell our properties, and by then there would be more growth. And I have to say the properties that we have left are not all fantastic, as most people who have a large portfolio don't always have wonderful properties. The other thing was that being aware of what to do in the frail stage, remembering too that Glenn and Sally live in Sydney. We live in a small country town and the expenses to live normally are not as great. So it was a structure, it was restructuring, David, that we're just in the beginning of doing, and it was a revelation to look at how to do it. We knew it was there, but we didn't know how to structure it.
Let me ask Glenn the question. Glenn, you've started your retirement planning younger, but you mentioned 90K a year and your plan was for 10 years in active and 15 in passive. How do you get an assurance or minimise grey hairs that you're going to have enough at the end? Because it's quite committing.
Well, we've still got a substantial property portfolio, and I think one of the important things for members of the property club who have portfolios built up is the order of sale, David. That can be a critical factor in ensuring that you've got this flow of money, when you need it through those 3 stages. And we've already sold a couple of our properties, and we found that when we were doing the modelling with you, that we actually, what our original plan was, we had an order of sale, and we found that when we started to look really closely when the crunch came, we actually had the order incorrect, if you like, because we needed to take a number of factors into account when we were looking at this order of sale, and we needed to look at what the current valuations were, for example, what stage our loans were at, and whether these particular loans were moving from interest only into principal and interest, and could we find a lender to maybe refinance. So we were reviewing our model, a plan, every few months, and then when we decided on a property to sell, we changed our mind because we found that one of them was valuing low, and we had to then decide we're going to hang on to that one for another X years. We changed our approach of which properties we might sell as we go through between now and through that active and passive phase.
Let me change tack altogether and talk about one of the points I didn't cover earlier on, and that's the concept of living inheritance. Now, estate planning traditionally is about passing on our wealth upon our death. But if you've got sufficient wealth, what you can do is advance that, like one of my clients did. So Glenn and Jill, I'll just ask you for some very short comments on the living inheritance. Is that something you're considering? And once again, how do you determine that you will have enough at the end if you give away a sum of money? And
Yeah,
I know, Jill,
we looked at that.
Did that, but I'll start with Glenn first. And Jill, I'll ask you to talk about the shack we talked about before. That's very mildly putting it, by the way, so you can tell the story. But Glenn, you go first.
Well, that's a very timely question for our family, because we do have children who are at that point where they want to invest in property, and we had to work with you to look at how we could do that in the context of what our own retirement modelling plan was. and we looked at, you know, what we had in superannuation, how our property portfolio was looking, how liquid were we at this point in time of our retirement, and you know, we thought we originally tried to break the model, and we couldn't, because you know, we looked at what would happen if interest rates go to record highs, or what would happen if the property market crashed, but the model still held up. So we made a decision then that we would try and you know, give our children a living inheritance, as you call it, and help them out now, rather than them waiting until, you know, we're at the end of our frail stage. So we're managing to do that with one of our children. We're about to do it with another. And then when we looked at our overall super and properties, and looked at what our lifestyle was and whether or not it would affect our cash flow, we found we could do it up front. So we were quite fortunate in that respect.
Jill, would you like to convey the story of your living inheritance?
Yes, we have a beach house in South Australia, down on the coast, and it's something that we've always never considered a saleable asset. We always wanted to pass it on to our two girls, but along our journey of property investing, we had used the equity in that property, which was freehold, to purchase other investment property. But now we wish to hand that over to the girls, so we have to freehold that property, and I'm talking quite a few $100,000 to freehold that property. And that was what was one of the things that led us to selling down our portfolio in order on the properties that there was equity in, that we would then be able to pay out this loan. And that's what we've been able to do. So we've paid out the loan on the beach shack, and we've been able to give that to the girls, and we're in the process of transferring that across to them so that they will have the benefit of that now, rather than when we die, perhaps in 20 years' time. And yet we will continue to use it exactly the same as we always have. And we think that will be a great thing to do now, because they both love it. We've had a lot of fun family times there. And I think the advantage of doing it now is then it no longer is an asset to us. It takes 5 years to transfer a property to family member or whoever you wish to transfer it to freehold, and it's considered by you, by the government, when it comes to any support from Centrelink, as an asset to you for 5 years. So we should have done this earlier. So David, I would say to anyone that has a property or properties that they wish to give to their children, it's certainly something they need to consider earlier on than us. I feel like we're doing in our 70s what, Glenn, you're doing at your age, which is a lot younger than us. And we're in a great position, but we would certainly be in a much better position had we sought some advice earlier, because I believe the Property Club has been fantastic at teaching us how to buy and how to hold, but none of us quite knew what to do at the end.
And I think there was you just briefly mentioned it, Jill, but as a result of that transaction to transfer that the beach house, your eligibility for a part pension for Centrelink kicks in, I believe, in 24-25 financial years. So that'll be another cause of celebration.
Yes, because, and that's a part of your philosophy, David. To be honest, I had always thought my goal was never to be involved in getting any money from the government. But as David explained, if it's there and you're eligible, so by restructuring, we're able to gain some money from Centrelink, which will enable us, as we age, to have access to support that we may have had to pay a lot of money for.
But that's fantastic. And I'll just be closing in a moment, and I'll ask Glenn and Jill to tell me the biggest mindset change from accumulation to drawdown, which is retirement. What was maybe a key eye-opener for them in understanding that. But before I do, I just wanted to talk about holding costs, because often I get questions, holding costs and the impact of buying a property in retirement or close to retirement. Because when you buy property close to retirement, and close is a very loose term, it could be 5 years, could be 10, could be 15, what you're doing is taking equity out of the existing portfolio and putting it into wealth accumulation. So it's not right or wrong. It's a case of how will it impact my start date? That's the question. And with regard to holding costs, often we have difficulty with regard to selling one to reduce the shortfall, but in holding a portfolio that is negatively geared, you're actually cutting your active stage of retirement by that amount that the shortfall is. So it's important to be aware of the implications of your actions, and that's my role as a financial planner to do when I do the retirement modelling. But in closing, Jill and Glenn, can we just talk about when you were in wealth accumulation mode and now that you're in drawdown stage? Any thoughts or reflections for the many members who will be listening this evening?
Joe, David, I think it's a really difficult thing to transition to, actually, because you've got this mindset right through your period of time when you're investing and purchasing properties and accumulating properties in your portfolio, and it's very difficult to let that go. And that's where you need somebody with, you know, the expertise to actually sit down with you and plan the approach, because I think, you know, we could have easily just kept rolling along and really not knowing where the end point was, and really not knowing how to access the funds we needed in retirement. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important, if you are selling properties, to get them into the right order when you're selling. So, you know, your holding costs are reducing as you go, and that your properties are selected at a point where you're not dipping into that superannuation, you're not dipping into those liquid assets, funding you've got that you want to use during your active years to try and prop up a you know, portfolio. So this is where people need to really sit down to the nitty-gritty of getting a planning model going, so they understand when that point in time comes, this is, you know, you need to be spending that money.
Great. And Jill, any thoughts for members, like in terms of the accumulation to drawdown mindset change?
Well, I would agree with everything that Glenn has said, and my advice was to seek information on this earlier. I mean, we only found property as an investment tool. Basically, we found the club when we were 53, and some people are looking at retirement at that age now. So your age, I believe, is a huge factor. But I guess the biggest thing for us was to realise that the asset base that we had, it was okay to start using those assets and liquidating in order to lead the lifestyle that we wanted to continue. We've had the most amazing lifestyle for the last 10 to 15 years, I would say, ever since retirement. But we've got to the stage where we didn't think that would be able to be continued. And it probably wouldn't have been if we hadn't have restructured. So I think the removal of the fear of whether you are going to have enough funds to continue and how best to go about it. David, if I can say, we actually sought some financial advice elsewhere, highly recommended company, and my biggest fear was that they said to us that you know far more about property than we ever will. And that concerned me, because the property was the base of our wealth, and we didn't want to just sell willy-nilly and put it in the share market. So I think it's very important that people talk to someone who understands property. I think that's the key. And to us, it was a revelation to talk to you, as we have over the years, but I think the relief of finally taking the step to plan the next 20 years has been our greatest asset from talking to you.
Well, thank you to Glenn and Jill and Bevan and Sally as well, who weren't presenting, but they've been part of the plan, instrumental in setting it up as well. One of my greatest joys is to share the journey with people like Glenn and Jill, and to see the aha moment on people's faces when you know that the plan works and is rock solid, and certainly it's the case with Glenn and Jill. So thank you very much. Very insightful from people who have significant portfolio investment properties and have made this work as well. So thank you for your time this evening. In wrapping up, let me give you some homework. If you're a member thinking, what do I do next? There's a lot of information here. Well, step number one, work out your living expenses in retirement and at 20% as a starting point. Why at 20%? Well, when you start retirement, you have your health, so you need to actually have a bit of money to do your bucket list activities. Number 2, work out what your retirement nest egg is. I touched on that earlier on. Work out your level of liquidity, and you'll soon determine whether you're illiquid or liquid. So that's some good homework to do. Secondly, talk to your property mentor or branch manager. Now, retirement planning is an evolving area. They may be aware of some strategies, may not, but it's good to start the discussion because they're the people who are the subject matter experts in relation to your property and wealth accumulation. Let's start a discussion there. And thirdly, and you can do all these 3 things at the same time, don't have to be one or the other. You can give Davlin Wealth Management a call. You can email us or call us, and we've actually done 3 one-hour webinars in a series called Living Your Best Retirement. So in order to access that material, you just have to email us and we'll pop you on our mailing list and send that through. So it's been an absolute pleasure presenting to you this evening. Thank you once again to Glenn and Sally for allowing me to participate in their retirement journey. It's been my privilege. And for Jill and Bevan as well, who I've known for yonks. And it's wonderful to be able to work with them and help them in that active phase where I often, and I'll have to do this with you as well, Jill, as I've done with Glenn and other clients, are you spending that allocation in active? And it's a bit of a laughable thing because often people can't spend it because it's just difficult to do, but it's a good problem to have. So I hope that was beneficial. And thank you, and I look forward to speaking with you further at a workshop or another webinar. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, David. That was a very, very insightful presentation today. Financial planning is a very, very important part of our transition, from accumulation to retirement. So please take advantage of David's service. Thank you again to Glenn and also to Jill for sharing your thoughts too. And thank you for everybody for attending today, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.